She didn't wear fancy clothes. She didn't speak much. Just a quiet girl standing in the corner of a rich woman's birthday party. But then, with a smirk, the host forced her to play the grand piano in front of everyone, just to mock her. The room expected laughter. Embarrassment. But when her fingers touched the keys, what followed left every guest frozen in awe. They never saw it coming, and neither will you. Maya, a shy, simple girl from a remote village nestled among the hills, had never before stepped into a world like this, where marble floors gleamed under ornate chandeliers and walls were lined with paintings that looked like they belonged in a museum. Her breath caught as she took in the size of the Thompson residence, a mansion so vast and opulent it felt like something from a fairy tale or a dream. The ceiling soared above her, etched with delicate gold leaf designs, and every surface seemed to glow under the soft, golden light. It all smelled foreign yet pleasant, expensive perfume, fresh-cut flowers, and polished wood mingling in the air. She clung closely to her mother's side, her small fingers grasping tightly to the edge of her mother's sari. Her mother had brought her along because there had been no one to watch Maya at home, and, perhaps secretly, because she wanted her daughter to witness how the other half lived. Her mother worked hard as a maid for the wealthy Thompson family, always respectful, always cautious, always invisible. Today, however, the grand estate was bustling with activity. It was Mrs. Thompson's birthday party, a lavish affair with at least 50 guests in glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos, soft laughter filling the air, and a string quartet playing a delicate melody from a distant corner of the drawing room. Maya stood awkwardly near the entrance, her shoes barely making a sound on the polished floor. No one seemed to notice her at first. Everyone was far too busy chatting, sipping champagne, and admiring one another's jewelry. Maya watched them all, wide-eyed, women with perfect hair and diamonds the size of her thumbnail, men with crisp suits and laughter that came too easily. It was a different universe, and she felt like a misplaced shadow in a world full of stars. Then, suddenly, a sharp voice sliced through the room's gentle murmur like a blade through silk. "Oh. Who is this?" an older woman asked loudly, her tone laced with amused disdain. All eyes turned toward the corner where Maya stood, shrinking behind her mother's frame. The speaker was tall and thin, with carefully styled silver hair and a gown that shimmered as she moved. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "Is she your daughter?" Maya's mother gave a small, nervous nod, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. This is Maya." The woman tilted her head, inspecting Maya like a curiosity. "Well," she said, lips curling into a smile that held no kindness, "we do love entertainment. Why don't you have her play us something on the piano?" A hush fell over the room. Maya felt her stomach twist into knots. Her hands, which had once danced across the keys of the battered piano in the village schoolhouse, suddenly felt like they were made of stone. She looked up at her mother, who looked just as surprised and uncertain. Maya hadn't touched a piano in months, certainly not one like the gleaming black grand that now stood at the center of the room, illuminated under a chandelier like a performer on stage. She didn't move. Someone chuckled. Another guest murmured something under their breath. But Mrs. Thompson, who had been watching quietly from a nearby settee, raised a hand. "Let her try," she said, her voice calm but firm. Maya took a step forward, then another. The murmurs faded behind her, and all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. She climbed onto the piano bench, barely tall enough to reach the pedals, and placed her trembling fingers on the keys. And then, she played. Mrs. Thompson knew exactly what she was doing. She had been watching the girl from the moment she entered, this quiet little thing in a faded dress, standing nervously by the door like a misplaced ghost. To someone like Mrs. Thompson, who had mastered the art of social control, it was easy to single out someone who didn't fit. The girl's wide eyes and hesitant movements made her vulnerability obvious, and in a room full of people desperate for entertainment, she had found the perfect target. Everyone could see that Maya didn't belong. Her plain, threadbare clothes stood in sharp contrast to the glittering gowns and designer suits that surrounded her. Her body language, shoulders hunched, gaze lowered, spoke of uncertainty and unease. This was not a warm invitation meant to include her. This was something else entirely. It was a setup, a cruel joke wrapped in a velvet voice and a glinting smile. I don't know, Maya stammered, her voice barely audible above the clinking glasses and rustling silk. Oh, come now, Mrs. Thompson said, her tone syrupy with mock encouragement. Don't be shy. It's just a little tune. A few guests chuckled politely, the kind of laughter people use to stay on the safe side of power. Others exchanged glances, their amusement tempered with discomfort. They weren't sure whether to laugh or feel pity. Some raised their eyebrows, sensing what was really happening, that this was less about music and more about spectacle. The piano, polished to a mirror shine, stood like a stage awaiting the final act of an unkind play. Maya's mother stood frozen beside the door. Her hands trembled slightly, and her eyes remained fixed on the floor. She had worked in the Thompson household for years, long enough to know when cruelty was disguised as civility. She had no power here, no voice that could challenge the hosts. Her silence was not consent, it was survival. But Maya, she took a breath. A single, slow inhale. Her eyes shifted from her mother to the piano, then to the expectant faces surrounding her. Her heart beat so loudly she could barely think, but somewhere inside her, a quiet defiance stirred. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was simply the urge not to be laughed at, not to be made a fool in front of strangers. She stepped forward. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she kept going, walking across the marble floor that seemed to stretch endlessly. The room fell quieter with every footfall, the background music fading into silence as all attention turned to her. When she reached the piano, she paused. She didn't sit like a trained musician. She didn't know how to adjust the bench or posture herself with poise. But none of that mattered. Because when Maya placed her hands above the keys, something shifted. Her fingers hovered in midair, uncertain yet oddly graceful. The room still held its breath, waiting to see her fail. But Maya wasn't thinking about them anymore. She wasn't thinking about the chandelier or Mrs. Thompson's smirk or her mother's downcast eyes. She was remembering the old piano at her village school, dusty and chipped, with 2 keys that didn't work. She was remembering the afternoons she spent alone in that room, playing the same pieces over and over until her fingers learned them by heart. She was remembering how music had always felt like an escape, like a secret she shared with no one but herself. And in that moment, she no longer felt small. She pressed the first key. A single note rang out, soft but sure. Then another. And another. And the room, which had prepared to laugh, fell silent, for a very different reason. Then, she played. The first few notes floated into the air, delicate and hesitant, like a bird testing its wings. The sound was soft, almost tentative, as if Maya herself wasn't sure she had the right to be there. But even in that uncertainty, there was something undeniably beautiful. The piano's voice, under her touch, was different, less polished, perhaps, but more honest. Pure. And then something changed. Her fingers began to move faster, finding confidence with every chord. The notes connected, melting into one another until they formed a melody unlike anything the room had ever heard. It didn't belong to Beethoven or Mozart or any other name the guests could recognize. This was something else, something raw and original. It rose and fell like a story being told with no words, only feeling. The music was haunting and joyful, delicate and fierce. It shimmered with longing, pulsed with hope. It was not perfect, but it was alive. The room, which had been full of murmurs and judgment moments earlier, was now utterly still. No glasses clinked. No shoes clicked on the marble. Even the waiters froze in place, their trays suspended mid-air as though the music had reached out and held them in place. Maya's eyes closed, not from shyness now, but from immersion. She was no longer in the Thompson house. She wasn't standing in front of strangers who had expected her to fail. She was back in her small village room, fingers moving across the scratched plastic of an old keyboard her mother had found in a dumpster behind a music school. Most of the keys stuck, a few didn't work at all, but she'd learned anyway. She had taught herself through trial and error, mimicking songs she heard on the radio, inventing her own when those ran out. There were no lessons, no teachers. Only heart. Only persistence. Only the sheer love of creating something beautiful in a world that didn't often offer beauty to someone like her. Her music told that story. It sang of early mornings and late nights, of a mother's sacrifice, of secret dreams kept alive through sound. It spoke of wanting more, not wealth or status, but the freedom to be heard. To be seen. Each note pushed back against the judgment in the room. Each chord unspoke every condescending smile. Each crescendo claimed space she had never been allowed to occupy before. And then, after what felt like an eternity and no time at all, she stopped. Maya's fingers stilled on the final note, letting it linger in the air. She opened her eyes slowly, not sure what she would find. For a moment, there was only silence. A long, breathless pause. It was as if no one knew how to return to reality. Then, like a wave crashing into shore, applause. Not just polite clapping, but a full standing ovation. Chairs scraped backward, hands came together, and faces that had worn smirks or blank curiosity now showed something else entirely, awe. Her mother stood by the wall, motionless at first. Then her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of pride. For years, she had cleaned these rooms, remained invisible in them. But now, her daughter had filled them with music that no one could ignore. Some guests clapped with real, heartfelt admiration. A few dabbed at their eyes. Even those who had laughed before, who had expected a spectacle of failure, now looked stunned, silenced by something far greater than they had anticipated. And Mrs. Thompson. Her carefully constructed smile had vanished. She stared at Maya, speechless, the smug superiority gone from her face. Because in the space of a single song, the girl she tried to humiliate had become unforgettable. The mood of the party had completely changed. Moments earlier, the atmosphere had been heavy with condescension, like a performance staged for the amusement of the elite. But now, that air had shifted. The music Maya had poured into the room had swept away the smugness, the laughter, the whispering assumptions. In its place was something new, genuine curiosity. Respect. Even admiration. Guests began to move toward Maya, their once detached expressions transformed into wide-eyed interest. They leaned in, eager to speak to her, to ask questions, to be near the girl who had just turned a quiet performance into a soul-stirring revelation. "Where did you learn that?" asked a woman in a deep green gown, her voice filled with wonder. "Do you have an album?" someone else chimed in, pulling out a sleek phone as if they might find her on a streaming service. "Can you play at our event next weekend?" added a tall man holding a half-finished glass of champagne. Maya blinked, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. This wasn't attention she had expected, or even understood. I've never played for anyone before," she admitted, her voice small but sincere. "Well, you should," said a gentleman in a sharply tailored designer suit. He gave her a nod that felt like a bow of respect. "You're a star." For a moment, Maya stood frozen in the middle of the room, overwhelmed by the sudden affection, the reversal of expectation. Just minutes ago, she had been a shadow in a corner, dragged into the spotlight to be mocked. Now, they were looking at her as though she were the only real thing in the room. But not everyone was pleased. Mrs. Thompson, standing off to the side with a stiff drink in hand, attempted to regain control of the moment. Her eyes darted between guests, her voice cutting through the praise like a blade wrapped in silk. "Well," she said, smiling tightly, "anyone can memorize a tune. Let's not get carried away." But this time, the room didn't bend to her tone. "Memorize," repeated a man near the piano, his brow raised in disbelief. That wasn't a memorized piece. That was original. Didn't you hear the emotion in it? That girl has raw talent. A murmur of agreement rippled through the guests. Heads nodded. Eyes glanced sideways at Mrs. Thompson, who suddenly looked out of place at her own party. Her attempt to diminish Maya had backfired. Instead of casting the girl in shadow, she had accidentally lit the stage for her debut. And just like that, the balance of power shifted. The woman who had orchestrated Maya's humiliation had humiliated herself instead. Her words, meant to belittle, now rang with bitterness. Her authority, once unquestioned, was unraveling in real time. The crowd, once hers to command, had turned its attention, and admiration, toward the girl she had tried to ridicule. Maya's mother stood quietly nearby, watching all of it unfold. Her eyes, still shining with tears, now carried something else too, astonishment. Pride. Perhaps even hope. For so long, she had moved through the world unnoticed, cleaning the homes of people who would never think twice about her. But tonight, her daughter had made them look, really look. And listen. The party, once a place where Maya didn't belong, had become a place where she shone. And though Maya still stood with shy eyes and hesitant hands, something had shifted inside her, too. Maybe she didn't fully understand what had just happened, but she felt it, the beginning of something. A crack in the wall. A door opening. She smiled, just a little. She hadn't come here to be seen. But now, she couldn't be unseen. Later that evening, as the guests began to drift out and the grand lights of the Thompson mansion dimmed to a softer glow, a kind-looking older couple approached Maya and her mother. They weren't dressed as extravagantly as the others. He wore a simple suit, and she had a soft shawl draped over her shoulders, but there was a warmth in their eyes that set them apart from the rest. They waited patiently until the crowd around Maya thinned, then stepped forward with gentle smiles. "Hello, dear," the woman said kindly. "We're the Albrights, Tom and Eleanor. We used to teach music for many years, before we retired. We saw you play earlier, and we were absolutely moved." Maya lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. Praise still felt foreign, like a language she didn't quite speak yet. Tom stepped in, his voice steady and sincere. "We'd love to help you, if you're willing. Lessons, mentoring, practice sessions, whatever you need. There's something in you, Maya. Real talent. It just needs the right guidance." Maya's mother, standing close beside her, looked at them with disbelief. Her eyes glistened again with the same emotion that had welled up during her daughter's performance. Hope. But it was tinged with worry. We'd be honored," she said hesitantly, "but only if we can afford it." The Albrights exchanged a smile, the kind that spoke volumes. Eleanor gently touched Maya's mother's hand. "No charge," she said firmly. "We're not doing this for money. We're doing this because talent like that deserves a chance. It would be a gift to us, truly, to help nurture something so rare." Maya could barely breathe. Her fingers, still tingling from the piano keys, curled into her palms as she tried to process what was happening. These weren't just kind words. They were offering her a future. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Maya, her performance had already begun its journey beyond the mansion walls. Someone at the party had recorded the entire moment on their phone, from her nervous approach to the piano, to the last breathtaking note. Within hours, the video had been uploaded to social media. The caption was simple: "A maid's daughter silences a room full of elites with one original song." It exploded. Comments flooded in from every corner of the internet. "This is why you never judge a book by its cover. She plays from the soul. I don't know who she is, but she made me cry. I hope someone gives this girl a scholarship." Musicians, influencers, and music schools began resharing the video. The story resonated with people far beyond the confines of that luxurious estate. Maya's music, born in obscurity, had struck a universal chord. People saw something in her that transcended background or wealth. They saw honesty, passion, and an untaught brilliance that couldn't be manufactured. And Maya? She didn't get swept away by it. She returned home with her mother that night, back to their modest apartment above the market. But something had changed. Her old keyboard, missing more keys than it had working ones, still sat by the window, but now, when her fingers touched it, they did so with newfound purpose. She kept practicing. She kept dreaming. But now, she wasn't just dreaming alone. The world was listening. From a forgotten corner of a party where she wasn't even supposed to matter, Maya had become the heart of the evening. The girl meant to be humiliated had instead become the one thing everyone would remember. And it was only the beginning. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want more inspiring content, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Got thoughts or experiences to share? Drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video.